Okay, thanks for joining us this afternoon for our final 95 talk. Really pleased to have Tim Evans here with us this afternoon. Tim, amongst many other things, is CEO of Worth Unlimited and has been doing youth work for...
Too long.
Many years. I'm not going to give anything away. So Tim is really experienced. So if you've got questions this afternoon that you want to put to Tim about relational youth ministry, do get typing away, type them in on the comments, and there'll be an opportunity at the end where we'll be able to put those comments to Tim. So the topic that we're going to be looking at this afternoon is what are the challenges and the opportunities of relational youth ministry. So Tim's going to share some thoughts on that with us. As we all know, there are many challenges, and I'm sure you've experienced some as well, so it'd be great to hear about your experiences of that. And we hope that there'll be some discussion afterwards as well. So like I say, type in those questions and we'll put them to Tim afterwards. So Tim, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. Just to let you know, you can't see much behind me, but just in terms of where you are. So you're in a converted shop, or I am in a converted shop front here in an estate called the Firs of Bromford in East Birmingham, which is one of the places that Worth Unlimited kind of works. So I'm really looking forward to having a bit of a conversation with you about relational youth work and what on earth that has to do with the mission of God. So let's hopefully have a bit of a conversation this afternoon about that. Probably want to start just by, Susie says I've been involved in youth work for a long time. So I was a young man when I started. Just to say a little bit perhaps about my story with it, because I think not about that makes it about me, but just in terms of that helps a little bit with the story really of some of the journey that I've been on in learning about this stuff over a long period of time. So my journey actually started in about 1991, I think it was. So I talk about actually having a double conversion. So I came from a non-Christian family and had a bit of a classic conversion experience when I was at university, which was life-changing and all the things that everything that involves. But I also started getting involved in something called Student Community Action, which was the volunteering agency for students when I was at university. And I was at university in Swansea in South Wales. And there were quite a few people who were Christians who were involved in that project. And the leader of it, the person who was paid to coordinate it, was a Christian. So not every student who participated in it was, but there was quite a lot of Christians involved. Long and the short of it was, I'd never really heard of youth work kind of before. I'd been in the Scouts and played football when I was a kid, but never really heard about this kind of profession that we might call youth work. So I started volunteering, and Swansea is surrounded by 7 council estates. And at the time I was there in the kind of early 90s, they were quite notorious. There was one in particular called Bonnymayan, which was a really well-known estate and was on the national press for all kinds of stuff kind of happening there, kids turning over cars and burning them out and all kinds of stuff going on really. And we started volunteering to go and meet young people up on those estates, which is one of those kind of naive student kind of things to do. But sometimes I think naivety can be a good thing in life, where you just get on and do something without perhaps overthinking the consequences of it. So we used to go up there, meet young people. My joke, which is not very funny with it, is it's the only time at university I ever got stoned because we drove a van into a cul-de-sac, big naive mistake, and then a whole group of young people lined up at the bottom with stones in their hands and decided they were going to stone the bus on the way back. So I didn't do drugs, but I did get stoned when I was at university, so there we go. The experience that really transformed things for me was that the guy who was the paid coordinator, was a Christian guy. He took a young person from Bonnymayan into his house. This young person was quite a notorious young person, and basically, long and the short of it is, because he welcomed that young person into his home, because he journeyed with that young person, because he invested himself in that young person's life, that young person actually became a Christian, went to college, straightened his life out, got in a good relationship. Real life-changing kind of stuff. And to be honest, I was really astounded by it. I was like, my goodness me, this faith stuff really works. And it doesn't work in an abstract sense. It works if you get your hands dirty and you get involved in people's lives. And the thing that struck me was, here I was, not at a great university, but here I was at university, and here was this young person who lived about 2 or 3 miles probably from where I lived. And his life chances and my life chances were completely different, even though we lived very close to one another. And I didn't have all the theology kind of for it, but there was something in me that was like, this God stuff is about this stuff. It is about people who feel that they're written off, knowing that they're not written off, knowing that there's a God that loves them and cares for them, but that actually, if we're going to bring transformation, the only way to do that is to get involved in their lives, is to go and meet them with where they are. That young person was never, ever going to darken the doors of a church. What he needed was people to get out there, get connected to him, build relationships with him, and invest in him and invest in his life. And along the way, the faith stuff began to emerge kind of for him. So that was a really transforming thing for, I was only about 21, 22 at the time. That was a real transforming kind of thing for me. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life until that moment. So I'd found faith. I'd seen the ability for a young person's life to be completely changed and completely transformed in a real practical kind of way. And so that's really what I've been trying to do ever since, really. So that's a long-winded start to our discussion, but actually, for me, a really important one, because it shows that actually, I've been trying to do it ever since, really, learning more as I've gone along, but that actually investing in people's lives in a real concrete, incarnational way, and really getting to know them and get to know what's going on for them can be really transformative. So I hope that kind of sets the tone really a bit for the conversation hopefully we're going to have kind of together, really. Because it's not, I think relational youth work isn't rocket science, but it is hard work. It's full of joy. We all know, those people of you who do it know the joy of seeing a young person really click with something, or really move on with their life, or really grab an opportunity, or find faith. The things that are really life-changing. And, it's a real honour to be part of someone's life where actually their life could go down one path and actually you're helping their life go down a different one. That's a wonderful thing. I find that a really joyful thing to be part of. But it also can be really hard. What happens when young people don't kind of take the steps that you want them to make? My wife and I are foster carers, and we've had young people live in our house who haven't quite made the steps that we want them to make because of trauma that has happened in their lives. And I think, one of the things about relational youth work, and one of the challenges, I think, is it can muck your theology up a little bit. So, although I was a young, naive Christian, which in many ways is a good thing, when I was at university and just saw that change happen for that young person, when you work with young people and have young people live in your house who've experienced trauma, who've experienced abuse, whose home life isn't very good, who don't really understand what love is and don't really understand what good relationships are like and don't have the social skills to do good relationships, you can't just have an abstract sense of, well, all they need is Jesus kind of approach to things, I don't think, because they don't understand what it is that you're talking about. Actually, what you've got to do is get involved in their lives and model it for them. So one of the beauties of fostering, and I know we're mainly talking about youth work, but one of the beauties of fostering is that you get to model family life to young people who've not experienced family life properly kind of before. And if we talk about being part of the family of God and the body of Christ and that kind of language, well, if people don't have the skills and the tools and the understanding to know what being part of that kind of community might mean, then you've got to get your hands dirty and get involved in their lives to help model to them and help them see kind of what that might look like and might feel like to them, because it's really different from their life experiences. So kind of very simplistic theological kind of models kind of began to not work for me, if I'm honest, kind of over the years. And one of the things that Worth actually is built on is this idea about God's shalom, God's wholeness, God's seeking of harmony and right relationships between people. So right relationships between people and God, right relationships between people and each other, and right relationships between people and the environment, creation and place. And that's really driven a lot of the work that we do. So we have a really holistic kind of view of mission and a really holistic view of what some of the young people that we work with, the things that they need in their lives. And lots of them don't get the God stuff, don't necessarily become Christians. But I think they experience something through relationships of the kingdom of God in their lives. There's something about carrying, not carrying God with you, because God is involved in people's lives, but there is something about what you bring to that relationship. I think that is them encountering something of God in you. And I think that's one of the challenges of this relational kind of approach is, do we do relationships for the sake of doing relationships, or do we do relationships because we've kind of got another agenda with people? And my experience is that I've seen young people find faith kind of along the way, but not because I was trying to manipulate relationships or do something with them that wasn't what a young person really understood that we were doing. These young people that we work with in particular, they need someone to befriend them, and they need someone to listen to them. They need someone to understand their lives a bit. And I think one of the things that has changed, that I've perceived over the years in terms of doing youth work, is that, especially where Christians are doing youth work, is we've been down a couple of different models. So we've been down the kind of attractional church, entertainment kind of model of things. And that has, for some young people, I get that journey has worked for them. But when you've got young people who've got tough lives, my experience is that you're not going to compete with the gigs that they can go to, etc. You're not going to be able to compete with the kind of entertainment industry that's around them. They've got tons of things to do. My 15-year-old foster boy never seems to get off his Xbox. Well, church is not going to compete with his Xbox in terms of entertaining him. That's not really what he needs. What he needs is real, authentic relationships that are full of integrity. And part of the Shalom stuff for us as Worth is living lives of integrity and helping young people live lives of integrity. So one of the things about relationships is relationships enable you to kind of be more of who you are. Rennie Brown talks about the power of vulnerability and the power of being in that place that's unsettling because you're having to expose something of yourself, but also that is transformational and changing for people. And young people spend a lot of their adolescence not trying to pretend to be something they're not, but trying to navigate who they are. They're trying to understand who they are kind of in the world. And often they'll act in slightly different ways according to who they're with. So if they're on their own with you, they'll act slightly differently to if they're in a peer group, where they're trying to show off to their friends. And they might act differently at school, where perhaps they're trying to be the tough kid in school, and that's not really them, but that's the way they feel they've got to operate. And I think what relational youth work does is it enables you to be alongside a young person and for them to feel valued for who they are, and you are, on the journey of relationships, encouraging them to, in one sense, take the mask off a little bit and be true and authentic to who they are, and encouraging them to do that. And that can be challenging for you and challenging for young people, because one of the things that relational youth work is about this idea of reciprocal relationships. So how do we build relationships that are reciprocal, that are trusting? And I don't know how you operate with your friends or people in your church, but good relationships are where you're open to other people, and that creates space for other people to be open to you, and you have a deepening of relationships. So relational youth work is one of those things that's kind of thrown around as a kind of term, and we have relationships with all different kinds of things and people, and they're not all the same, are they? So I might have what you might term acquaintances, which are not really kind of deep relationships and deep friendships, but who you might I might go to football with, or play poker with, because that's one of the things that I love doing, or cycle with, but they're not those deep, meaningful kind of relationships that are really helpful for our lives. So I have a smaller group of friends who operate like that, and then I'm married, so I have your marriage relationship often acts like that, where those friendships are real and true. So we have to get over this idea that relational youth work is simply about hanging out with young people. That is simply about providing a space. They'll come in, we'll have fun with them, and away they go again. It's a kind of intentional but informal process. So it's got intentionality to it in my mind. You are intentionally trying to build a relationship that deepens over time with a young person. You're trying to do life with that young person. You're trying to be alongside that young person or that group of young people, and for them to build trust with you and to feel that over time they can be more open with you about what's going on in their lives. The challenge, and it'd be interesting what you all think, is how do we reciprocate that? When we're not their peers, we're adults in their lives, but we're not adults with authority. So we're not the same as teachers, social workers, parents in their lives. And actually young people, I think they really yearn for that actually. Even if on the surface sometimes they don't show it, they actually yearn for those kind of relationships with people who are concerned for them but don't lord it over them, and where actually the relationship is a voluntary one, where a young person can choose how much they want to engage, how often they want to engage, how much they want to open up to you, how much they don't. It's all on their terms. The challenge for us is to go, well, actually, how do we reciprocate that? So how open am I about my life? How open am I about the things that are going on for me? How open am I about my struggles? How open am I about the things I don't understand? My experience is that actually, different people have different boundaries to that, if you like, and that's one of the things for you to, those of you who do this kind of stuff, for you to think about. Some people are quite happy having young people knock at the door and, come in and have a chit chat, and other people are not. Other people are happy to talk about vulnerability in their lives, and other people less so. But my experience is if you think that out and kind of have some boundaries to that, but then are open with young people and have a level of vulnerability with young people, you create almost a space between the two of you that I actually think God inhabits, actually. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am. So in relationships, God inhabits relationships. The Trinity, right from the beginning, God is in relationship to himself. That actually God inhabits those relationships. We don't have to do something with those relationships to get young people to encounter God. They encounter God through the relationships we have. It doesn't mean they all sign up to be Christians, but it does mean that there's something in that vulnerability that is a God space, do you know what I mean, if you like, for people. So that's something that we have to think about when we're doing this kind of work, and the challenges of it. But it is a beautiful, if challenging thing, I think, to do. So that's a little bit for me about what kind of relational youth work is. At one level, it's not rocket science, like I said earlier. It's about building reciprocal, trusting relationships with young people. It's about doing life with young people. It's about role modelling something of how to live authentically to young people. I think one of the challenges that we have gone down with youth work is that we have thought about not just the entertainment model, but the programme model. So actually what it's about is about getting young people into our programmes, and then they will learn stuff through our programmes, and because of the things they learn, that will change the way they see the world. When I think about being a young person, activity was important. So I was in the Scouts, and that was really important. I learned lots of life skills through doing those activities, hiking over mountains and canoeing and climbing and all that kind of adventurous stuff. I learned actually a bit of leadership because I became a patrol leader and all that kind of stuff that you do. I played football, and that was good for me, and I really enjoyed it. But actually the things that I wish I'd had more of when I was a young person was adults who knew what they were doing in relationship with me. That's actually what I would have wanted. And actually I was quite an insecure teenager, despite outwardly being quite confident, and despite doing lots of things with my week and being active and involved in things. Underneath it, I was actually quite an insecure teenager. And actually that was part of my search for God, actually, because actually I wanted to kind of know if there was more to life than just my anxieties and insecurities. I wish that some of the people who ran Scouts and ran the football club, and they were great people, I actually wish they'd had the skills to kind of come alongside me as an individual and understand what was going on underneath and spend enough time with me for me to expose that to them and to be a bit more vulnerable kind of to them. I think actually that would have done me a lot of good when I was a teenager, and would have stopped some of the anxieties and insecurities that I've kind of carried into adult life. There was stuff going on at home that wasn't great for me. I never really had anybody to talk to about that stuff. So it is a mistake to think that what young people need is just activity or just entertaining, because there's stuff going on in their lives. And we work with young people who are on the margins of things and who have quite difficult lives, but actually most young people have stuff going on. there are young people who appear to be doing well at school, well in life, well in church, who've got all kinds of stuff going on in their lives. All the evidence around mental health is that young people are not doing well, like right across the board. It's not just the poorest kids, that are doing poorly. It's actually right across the board. So at a very basic level, young people need somebody to listen to them, someone to be alongside them, someone to care for them, someone to nurture them. And they need safe places to come to and safe places to belong to. And then program and activity can happen over the top of that, but actually at its core, youth work is a relational process. So it's actually about having the confidence to go, do you know what? Good youth work is about having good conversations with young people. It's having good dialogue with young people. You've got to be prepared to talk about football and God on an evening with a young person, depending on where they're at and what they want to do. I guess the other thing to think about with some of this stuff is, one of the challenges is that, what time have we got to invest in young people? If it takes time to invest time in them and to do life with them, well, hang on a minute, how do we connect with a significant number of young people if that's happening? That is one of the challenges that you get. One of my things would be, actually, what did Jesus do? So Jesus had kind of one disciple that he loved, 3 that were core, 12 that were disciples, plus a whole bunch of others, because there's a whole issue about women being written out of the text, and actually women were really important in all of that process. But then there was a wider group of disciples who kind of hung around Jesus but weren't part of the tight-knit group, and then there were the crowds. Then there were the masses that Jesus spoke to. Jesus knew that he couldn't invest the same amount of time in everybody. The part where he tells the disciples to go off and go to towns, and he says, if you find a person of peace, then go into their house and accept their hospitality, and if you don't, shake the dust off your feet and move on. And persons of peace are actually really good ways of thinking about working with young people. Who are your young people of peace? Now, they may not be the leader of a group of young people, but actually they're really significant young people who, if you invest time and effort into them, they're actually your gateway to a whole wider group of young people, and they are influences of other young people. So thinking who you're investing in and what kind of time you're putting into young people, I think, is a really important part of the process. Some of the ways that Worth thinks about things is we have what's called a user journey. Sounds a bit technocratic, if you like, but it's like a funnel. So what we talk about is contact work with young people, which is at the top of the funnel, which is the most young people. So we might go and spend time with young people at the park. We might run an open youth club kind of session. We might have lots of young people who kind of begin to engage with us. In London, we have a bus that goes around different estates, and lots of young people come on that bus. Then we talk about activities and interests. So what are the things that young people are into, and how can we facilitate that? So they might want to just hang out with their friends and play PlayStation. They might want to play football. They might want to do hair and beauty. They might, there's all kinds of things that young people want to do. So how do we tap into the things that they're interested in? And we form kind of groups, if you like, around that, which can still be size-ish in terms of number, but are reasonable size-ish stuff. The next bit we talk about is what we call focused interventions, which basically means kind of focused smaller group kind of work. And actually in some of our work, we've got young people who've experienced interest in faith, and we've made that part of the focused intervention stuff of going, actually, okay, there's 10 of you who are really interested in that, we'll set up a group for you and you can begin to kind of explore what you want to explore. But we run all kinds of things, employability type programs, one-to-one mentoring we do a lot of, and that's a really good way of spending time with young people. And actually in terms of churches, we found mentoring a really good way of getting people who maybe wouldn't want to do youth work, because it would scare them a bit to kind of think about an open youth club on a Friday night. I don't really have those kind of skills. But actually saying to somebody, could you spend an hour or two a week with a young person, one-to-one, getting to know them, doing life with them, actually some people feel all right, do you know what I mean, about doing that. And then the last part we do is what we call giving back. So going, actually, as young people get a bit older, as young people kind of develop with us, we don't want them to simply be recipients of provision. We think that young people can change the world. I think that young people can be life changers, world transformers, if we invest properly kind of in them. Jesus' disciples were young men and young women, and he invested in them because he thought they could change the world. So we do things like social action with young people, so getting young people involved in their local community, getting them thinking about the difference that they can make. We do social enterprise, so getting young people economically active, doing things that help them learn about how to earn money and how to serve customers and how to develop projects that serve other people, etc. We young leaders, so we do things that are about investing in young people and young adults, actually, that are about enabling them to be agents of change and transformation. And I suppose one of the things that is worth us thinking about is, this idea of, it's a twee point, but, when did the disciples become Christians? That the disciples were being discipled into a way of being before they really understood what they were doing, and before they really understood who Jesus was, and before they really understood what all of that meant. That came later for them. So I think sometimes we get trapped in the kind of, we need to build relationships with young people, we need to convert them, and then we need to disciple them. I actually think that God is at work in the world and God is at work in people's lives, and that it is perfectly possible to disciple people, if you like, nurture people, mentor people into a way of living compassionately and lovingly and caringly and thinking about others, not just yourself, etc., even if they haven't signed on the dotted line to say, I'm doing that because Jesus means something to me. That actually discipleship is a way of life, and the early Christians were called followers of the way, so thinking of it as a way of living rather than just a set of propositions that you have to sign up to, that you can easily do that before young people are Christians, even if young people don't become Christians, because God's at work in their lives and in our lives. So I think there's a whole bunch of, that may be controversial for some people, but there's a whole bunch of way of thinking about where is God at work and how is God at work in people's lives, and how are we going about that we could think about. And aligned to that is we use something called asset-based community development in the way we think about things. And I want to just probably finish with this way of thinking about things that's got kind of two aspects to it. So asset-based community development talks about tapping into people's passions, skills, gifts and talents. So how we, as a community here and as a church where I live, we think about how can we receive the gifts of our neighbours? How can we facilitate the passion, skills, gifts and talents of our neighbours, including young people, rather than telling them what's good for them or trying to fix them or trying to possess them or trying to get them to come to what we want them to do? How do we tap into those things? Because those are God-given gifts and talents and skills that people have got. People are made in the image of God first before we start thinking about brokenness and fallenness and all of that kind of stuff. So we think about that with young people, trying to help them dream, help them think about what they want to be in the world, help them think about what they want to do that makes a difference and that makes a change. And what if we as the church, because I think young people are concerned about the world around them, they are passionate about justice, they are passionate about what they see around them, they sometimes don't have the roots to kind of work out what to do with that passion. What if we as the church could invest in them and go, do you know what, you're concerned about that, we're concerned about that, let's do this together, and somewhere in those relationships will come moments when we can share something of the hope that is within us, the sense that God is actually renewing and reconciling the whole of creation, and that we're doing something that is a part of that. So when we fight for justice, we're fighting for God's reconciliation of the world. Then when we fight for justice, we're on the side of people that God is on the side of. So that's a really key thing for the way we think about it. We don't treat young people as deficits, we don't treat them as problems, we don't treat them as, we've got to help them through adolescence. We treat them as people who can be transformative and change the world. So that's a few kind of thoughts along the way. So there might have been some questions that kind of arose for you through that, so I'd love to hear those. I guess there's some practical things we could think about, like actually how do we connect with young people? How do we build relationships with young people? Where are young people? How do we want to get to them? How do we get to know them? How do we do life with them, and what are some of the challenges with that? Where's the capacity come from for that? My experience is that people can do that stuff. I guess one of the interesting questions that I have is, how does church work with all this stuff? So the culture of young people, the society that they're in, the way that they work, especially the modern day stuff around social media and all that kind of stuff, church just often feels culturally a long way away from them. So how do we do church, and how do we build community intergenerationally with young people that enables them to feel part of something, to feel valued? And it's not just a youth worker's job, it's actually all of our job to nurture young people and to be alongside young people. How can we create communities of faith that want to welcome and value young people, that want to get out there and get connected with young people and want to build lives with young people? Your questions?
Great, thanks Tim, and thanks everyone for listening. Got some really great questions there to have a think about, and we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on those. So those last couple of questions that Tim just ended with there. So how do we connect with young people? How do we do life with young people? We'd love to hear about how you're doing that, what you found has been really great about doing that, and what have been some of the challenges as well. And then that second question there about what is the role of the church here? How can the church do this? What does it mean for young people to be part of an intergenerational faith community? Again, if you've got thoughts on that, we'd really love to hear those. If you want to type those in. And if you've got any other questions at all that you want to put to Tim, any comments, anything that he said that you maybe disagree with and want to put an alternative thought out there, we'd love to hear that. So do get typing in, and we'll give you a couple of minutes, but we've got a couple of questions that have already come through. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to type in a few more, and then Tim will be grilling you.
Great.
Okay.
I look forward to the grilling.
Okay, so we've got a few questions.
I'm all nervous now.
Okay, so the first one is, you talked about kind of having reciprocal relationships and this asset-based approach.
Yep.
Can you give us an example or a story of when you've done that and how it's worked?
Yeah, sure. So a good story actually is, let me tell you the story of Stuart, who currently works in our bike social enterprise. Let me tell you a little bit about his story, because I think that this touches on a lot of the things of what I was trying to say. So Stuart was a young person, and he won't mind me telling this, by the way, because he tells you this story all the time. He tells this story all the time. So Stuart is a young person who we first met when he was 16. And he was referred to us by the police because he was getting involved in a bit of trouble where he lived. And the police were being really good, actually, and funding us to go, we don't want to keep arresting these young people. Actually, these are young people who we need to change the direction of their lives, and we can't do that because we're the police, but maybe you can do that. So we started mentoring Stuart. So first point was contact with him. Now, that happened to come through a referral process, which is actually not usual for us. Normally, we just get involved in communities and young people and get to know them. But it's a perfectly viable way of doing something. So we got to know Stuart, and literally Dan, if he was here, one of our youth workers, he would talk about having to bang on Stuart's door at middle of the day to get him out of bed, to get him to come and do something. So Stuart really wasn't doing anything kind of with his life. Now, the police obviously wanted us to, invert commas, fix him and stop him misbehaving. But we were really interested in getting to know Stuart as a person. So there you got the process of Dan spending, probably a couple of years, just getting to know Stuart, getting him involved in activity, being alongside him. But Stuart and Dan built a really good relationship with each other. And then we do an annual cycle fundraising ride, and so Stuart and a few other young people kind of came on that. And it was one of those, one of the things we talk about is this idea of young people having kind of treasure within, and sometimes the education system, and I could wax lyrical about that, doesn't always extract that kind of from young people, because he's got quite a prescriptive understanding about what that means. So Stuart had never felt that he'd found the thing that he cared about, that he was passionate about. And so what happened was he got involved in a bit of trouble, and people treated him as trouble. We didn't want to treat him as trouble, so here's the asset-based stuff. We wanted to find the nugget that Stuart had within him was the thing that he cared about. which he probably didn't know either what that was yet. Anyway, he comes on this cycle ride, 150 miles, 3 days, pouring rain, really, tough ride, and he absolutely loved it. He absolutely loved it. Like, just found perseverance, there's character traits, perseverance in himself that he'd not had at school. So his teachers at school would have gone, he just gives up. But actually, he'd found something where he actually did have perseverance in him. He just not found the outlet kind of for it. So they come back from the ride, and we happen to have some funding to do an enterprise program with young people, helping them think about what it might mean to start a business and what business was involved in business. Anyway, 3 of them went, do you know what, we got into cycling and we really like this course, could we start something? So with 3 young people, we started something called Gear Up, which is a bike social enterprise. And Stuart, who is now in his mid-20s, is still with us. And he not only cares deeply about, here's something I like cycling, I like being fit, I like the feeling of that, I like the idea of running a business, I like the idea of all of that. The thing that is probably most moving with Stuart is, he goes, sorry, I get all emotional with these kind of things. Stuart goes, I want this to be a project that invests in the kids who are like me. So I know that I've got somewhere because somebody found the thing for me. And I want to do that for other kids who are like me, which is really moving. And that's my point about the asset-based stuff. We found the nugget with him, but also the discipleship thing. Because actually, him going, I want to invest in others who are struggling like I was, is a discipleship thing. That's a God thing. Now, he hasn't got there with the God stuff. He's not sure what he thinks about it, etc. But to me, God is at work in him and what he's doing because of that stuff. So there's a story about a young person who we refused to write off at 16, who at 26 is running his own social enterprise that's impacting on other kids who are like him. And I think that's beautiful.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you. So another one. When we think about relational youth ministry, we often think about that being face-to-face.
Yep.
I wondered if you've given any thought to how social media or gaming, which is actually the place where a lot of young people are spending their time, where they're building relationships. How does the church, or how do we engage with that, and what role does that play in relational youth ministry? So I think that's a brilliant question.
I can recommend actually a Grove booklet which is called Spirituality and Gaming, I think, which is written by Alistair Jones and a guy called Andy Roberton, who does a lot of work around spirituality and gaming. He's based in Exeter. So I can recommend that for a start, because I think this is one of the challenges I think that we've got, and I don't have the whole, if I'm honest, I don't have the whole answer to it, because I think one of the challenges for us in relational youth work is the changing context that young people are operating in. So when I first started in full-time in 1993, young people didn't have phones, never mind anything else. And so actually they were looking for things to do, and they were looking for activity, and they were looking to do things with their friends. Now, how do you work with a young person who's gaming at 2 o'clock in the morning, whose relationships are with other young people, often around the world? How do we do that? I don't have the whole answer to that. There's all kinds of issues kind of with it, but I think at its core, I think of relational youth work as about building community. So if it's about building community, so relationships between people that are honest and open, etc., where we share lives together, it must be possible to do that kind of online, and it must be possible for youth work to think about how to inhabit that space. But I do think actually that's a whole piece of thinking that we all need to do. So I don't have a whole answer to that, but I do think it's actually a very, very important question that we should all wrestle with how to do. Mm-hmm. But I would recommend the Grove booklet as a good place to start.
Great. Another one, what role does the Bible have in relational youth ministry?
Oh, that's a good one. Thank you for the tricky question, whoever put that in. What role does the Bible play? So, let me think about how we use the Bible first, and then what it is. So let me do it that way round. So I think we as workers, we need to understand Scripture well ourselves, actually, and not just the kind of doctrinal basics kind of part of it, but actually how, for instance, in particular, how Jesus kind of operates kind of with it. So storytelling, I think, is really important, actually. So I think part of being in relationship with people is hearing something of their story and being able to share something of your story. It's then not a big leap to go, how in that relationship does God's story interact with those? And actually our own, if testimony is the right word, but our own experiences of God and our own experiences of how the Bible has come alive for us are an important part of those relationships, I think. The thing I would say is we have to do that with authenticity and integrity. It's not about sort of trying to find a way to kind of wedge it into a relationship and wedge it into a conversation. You have to trust that God is at work and God is doing stuff and let it happen in a really natural kind of way. Some people feel more confident than that with others. So I think there's a bit of a translating kind of thing about how we do stories and stuff kind of within it. But I also think in a natural relationship it is... I'll give you an example actually that I can think of what I've done is young people around conflict, for example, and talking to young people about resolving conflict in a really natural way. I have gone, well, actually, Jesus talks about loving your enemies. What do you guys feel about that? And then they'll be off on one of that's stupid and what's he talking about, etc. But you've introduced a kind of countercultural way of seeing the world that's based on the life and teachings of Jesus in a really natural way into a conversation that stops a young person in their tracks, because it actually stops the assumptions that they've made about how the world should work. I would say we've got to know that stuff really well ourselves and know how it can apply really well so that we're on top of it. So when those opportunities, if you like, naturally kind of arise, we're ready to kind of introduce those kind of things.
Brilliant. Okay. What are the most common mistakes you feel in youth ministry?
Lots, I think. What are the most common mistakes? There's just so many. So it depends what kind of pressure. So one I would say was not good boundary setting kind of for yourself. I think that's one of the things. So actually, it's a really obvious point, but you can only give out as much as you've been filled up. So actually, I think one of the roles of churches actually is making sure that you're really supporting people who are working on the front line with young people, because they need to be looked after, cared for, prayed for, asked if they're okay, etc. Because it's quite an emotional kind of roller coaster jumping this stuff. So one of the mistakes I think is being the hero. So feeling that you're this kind of knight in shining armour that's come charging over the hill, that's going to rescue all these young people from the depths of despair and the things that are going on in their lives. One is young people have more resilience than we give them credit for, but also it's a persuasive temptation, but it's one that we should resist, actually. This idea of being the fixer or the helper. So that would be one of the mistakes, I think. I think when I first started out, I thought I was going to fix all of these young people and Jesus was going to help me fix all these young people. And actually that's not really the way it works. You've just got to do life with young people and do it in a way that keeps your sanity kind of going. So I think going for the long haul, like how you go for the long haul, is really important, I would say. Sometimes you can go too fast, actually, and youth workers can burn out kind of really easily. I don't know if it's a mistake, but some of the mistake we think is that youth work is a young person's game, and you have to be cool and funky, and as you can tell, I am none of those things. I wasn't even, when I was young, I wasn't cool or funky, so I wasn't that bit of it either. But actually, that's not really what young people want, actually. Do you know that some of the best youth workers I know are grandparents, actually, because young people their grandparents' generation, I'm of their parents' generation now, but actually their grandparents' generation is a really important one. So one of the mistakes is actually to think that you can't do it, because actually lots of people can do it if you're true and authentic kind of to yourself and you find the right context in which to do it. What else would I say were mistakes? Getting the dynamics wrong between young people. I think sometimes you can kind of put the wrong groups of young people kind of together. It results in kind of disruptive behaviour and something quite challenging, etc. But to be honest, if I'm honest, I think the thing that is the most I find the most challenging is actually the external stuff that's around what you're doing. So what funders want, what often the church wants, what your boss wants. I mean, I'm lucky now I'm the boss, so I'll get to be all right in my own organisation. But actually those factors can sometimes distort what you're actually trying to do. And actually that's some of the hardest things. So how do you stay true to yourself and what you're trying to do whilst knowing that you can't ignore those kind of external kind of factors? I could probably think of 100 more as I go.
Final question. If someone's been listening to this and they've thought, this sounds brilliant, I really want to get involved in relational youth ministry.
Yep.
What advice would you give to them about how to get started with that?
One is not to do it by yourself, would be a start. So make sure you know why you want to do it and get some buy-in. So if you want to do it, if you're starting somewhere new, make sure you've got the right team and structure and support kind of around you. That might sometimes mean, a lot of what we do as Worth is we come alongside people who want to do something in their local community but maybe don't quite know what to do or want some structure around themselves to be able to do that. So talk to us, be one thing, if you want to start something. But not to do it by yourself, and make sure you've got buy-in with that stuff. For instance, if you're doing it out of a church, kind of make sure that the church is supportive to what you're doing and the church leader is supportive to what you're doing. Get some training, I would say, is important. Don't be naive and gung-ho like I started out kind of as doing that. And kind of work out what you want to do and what you can bring to that. So, I don't know, if you can play the guitar, go into your local school and kind of offer to do guitar lessons with local young people. Or if you're into sport, do something with that. Find the thing that you're good at. And apologies, that's our letterbox banging from young people kind of trying to get in the door. Is to find the connecting point and do that in a really natural way that you feel kind of is safe and good for the way that you want to work, and kind of go from there. And don't be afraid of investing in the small numbers. Don't be afraid of kind of going, you know what, there's 5 young people down my road that I want to get to know, and I'm going to do something that enables me to get to know them. One of the best youth work I did was when I lived in the inner city in Birmingham, is there was a lad who lived 3 doors down from me, whose dad was an alcoholic abuser who lived in an overcrowded house, and he'd often come into my house to come and do his homework. His mum, gave permission, do you know what I mean, that kind of stuff. And it just was a really natural thing. I saw him in the street. He would come into my house every now and again. And actually, that relationship lasted 5 or 6 years because it was just one young person in my street. But actually, that was fine. It made a real difference to him and to me. My relationship with him made a difference.
Yeah, there's been a comment actually kind of picking up on that. With the mission imperative of the 95, it's daunting to think of taking 2 years, so like the example you gave of Stuart's story, to get to the point where a relationship has enough honesty and integrity. I'm not questioning that it's essential, just that it's almost intimidating in light of such an enormous deficit.
Yes. Yes. So here's what... I hear that in the right way, but here's one of the things that we should resist in my mind. Okay, so whether we like it or not, we are in if we ever were in a Christian country, Christian era, we're not in it now. We're in a very post-Christian kind of society, and we're not going to change something by panicking about it or having lots of anxiety about it, because actually that will distort the way that we work. Actually, if Jesus chose, Jesus could see what was happening in his own community and could see that people had lost sight of the kingdom of God and lost sight of, what was important, and some of the ways that God was being talked about was a bit distorted, etc. And then there's a whole bunch of other theology you can add to that. If it was good enough for Jesus to go, do you know what, I'm going to invest in a few in order that over time we'll invest in the many. If that is good enough for Jesus, I think that's good enough for us. So the thing for me is not to be anxious about the 95%. We have to accept that that's the scenario we're in. We're not going to meet everybody, resource everybody, connect everybody quickly. It's just not the way the world is. We have to learn to do mission in exile. So one of the things that we use a lot of is the bit in Jeremiah where God says, seek the shalom, seek the welfare of the city to which I've sent you, for in its shalom is your shalom, in its welfare is your welfare. So seeking the good of people around us in exile and treating ourselves as being in exile, we're no longer the centre of attention, I think is just something we're going to have to accept. So I get that anxiousness, but actually I think it's slow and painstaking, etc. One of the things that someone told me the other week was, I hadn't really realised this, but in the early Victorian era, so around the turn of the 18th, beginning of the 1800s, church attendance was really low. So it's not like this is a new phenomenon, but what the church did was get itself stuck in. So all of these organisations like Barnardo's and YMCA and lots of organisations started at that time because Christians just saw need and went, we're going to do something about that. By the end of that century, church attendance had shot up. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying, I am no sociologist, so I'm not claiming direct correlation, but actually I think it's just about getting stuck in and getting our hands dirty and accepting the context in which we're in and making a difference one at a time, 2 at a time, 10 at a time, a group at a time, gradually kind of growing stuff, and I think that will change things kind of over time. So I would say resist the anxiety.
Great, thank you. And kind of linked to that, actually, there's another comment that's come up. I think the stuff that Tim has been talking about fits very well with the findings of Sticky Faith.
Yep.
And the need for adults in the church, even those unconnected with youth work, to get to know young people and take a genuine interest in them. I'm always struck by the powerful impact of people sharing their lives with young people and welcoming them into their homes in appropriate and safe ways, of course.
So there is a lot of, and actually there's research to back that stuff up, which is what the Sticky Faith stuff and other stuff is about, which is we have been down this trend of, oh my goodness me, there's not young people in church. What are we going to do? I know what we'll do is employ a youth worker and we'll set up lots of activities for young people and we'll get them involved. And actually now all the evidence is that hasn't worked particularly well if your definition of what's worked well is about young people in church. And, I would say that youth work is a much broader kind of understanding of what's important. And so it is important to invest in young people's lives. I think youth work needs to change to being a facilitator of intergenerational community building, both in church and in communities. And my own journey has been that Worth has been on that journey. So where we're sitting, now in an estate in East Birmingham, is we still do youth work and youth work activities and mentoring and support young people. But actually we talk a lot more about how is that helping build intergenerational community. And actually our church has an adult community building project, which I chair. And actually we work very closely together to promote intergenerational community building. And all of the evidence is that is so much better for young people, both in the church in terms of helping them stay there, if you like, and helping them flourish there, but also in community life, rather than isolating them and going, let's hope you make it through teenage years and we'll wipe our brow if you make it through safely. So I think the person is absolutely right that that's more what we need to do. And one of my challenges for the church would be is how do you build that kind of culture and that kind of environment, and then have some people who've got particular skills around working with young people, who can connect with young people and build initial relationships with young people, but those people have then got to act as brokers into a culture that's a much more wider, nurturing, intergenerational one than hiving young people off over there, because they won't make it back to you, is all the evidence. So I think they're right. So it's a challenge for church leaders. If you're a church leader watching this, how do you create that kind of culture in your church?
It's a good challenge. Good challenge. Thanks very much, Tim. That's
Pleasure.
Really
really
great. Thanks everyone for joining us. And if you've got any further questions, comments, Tim is in the 9-to-5 community, so you can continue to put them on the feed, and I'm sure that he'll be able to help answer them for you.
I'll do my best.
Thanks for joining us. And keep tuned, because this is the last of the 9-to-5 talks, but there will be more coming your way soon. Take care.